So, President Trump is in South Korea for the final leg of his big Asia trip. And believe me, the entire world is watching. There is a whole lot on the line here. We're talking major trade deals, flaring regional tensions. Really, every single handshake could send ripples across the global economy.
And heading into it, President Trump sounded, incredibly optimistic, especially about his big meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He's projecting a ton of confidence that some kind of major deal is right around the corner.
But as always, it's never quite that simple, right? Behind all the optimistic talk, this trip is just packed with really complex negotiations and some pretty serious geopolitical friction. So let's break down what's really going on here.
Here's the game plan for how we're going to unpack all this. First up, the huge deal with China. Then, we'll get into the strained alliance with the host nation, South Korea. After that, we'll look at the regional tensions that are kind of forming the backdrop for all these talks. And finally, we'll ask, what happens next?
All right, let's dive right into the main event of this trip. This is the one that has global markets, frankly, on the edge of their seats, that critical meeting between Trump and Xi. Okay, so the primary goal here, the big prize, is to get some kind of truce in this trade war. I mean, just the prospect of these two leaders meeting was enough to give the markets a boost, and that tells you everything you need to know about how high the economic stakes really are.
So what's actually on the table? Well, it really boils down to a pretty direct trade-off. The U.S. is offering to potentially lower its tariffs, and in return, China would have to commit to cracking down on exports of fentanyl precursors. Those are the chemicals used to make the deadly opioid. And this is a huge deal for the U.S. at home, given the devastating opioid crisis.
And we're not talking about small potatoes here. There's talk of potentially halving the current 20% tariffs the U.S. has on Chinese goods. That is a massive economic lever being used in these negotiations.
Okay, so while all eyes are on the China talks, the negotiations with the host country, South Korea, they're proving to be a lot trickier.
You see, there was this huge $350 billion investment plan announced back in July, and it's basically dead in the water right now. The talks have just hit a major roadblock.
And here's why it's stalled. It really comes down to this. On one hand, you have the U.S. pushing South Korea to pay more for its own defense. That's been a consistent theme for this administration. And on the other hand, South Korea is asking for U.S. immigration reforms so it can get more of its skilled workers into the country for big projects, like a new Hyundai battery plant in Georgia.
But you'd never know there was a problem listening to the president speak publicly. To a group of CEOs in Gyeongju, he called the U.S.-South Korea bond a very special relationship and even predicted a trade deal would get finalized very soon.
And this is where things get really interesting. None of these talks are happening in a bubble, right? They're playing out against this backdrop of some pretty serious and rising regional tensions.
I mean, check out this timing. Literally, just hours before Air Force One even touched down on the tarmac in South Korea, something happened. Yep, North Korea went and test-fired a nuclear-capable cruise missile. It's an incredibly provocative move that immediately raises the security stakes. Talk about adding pressure to the situation.
And then, of course, you have the elephant in the room, the incredibly sensitive issue of Taiwan. China sees the self-ruling island as a breakaway province, and it has always maintained that it will retake it, using force if it has to.
And make no mistake, Beijing is not being subtle about this. A spokesperson from China's Taiwan Affairs Office came out with this very direct, very forceful statement, basically reminding everyone that using force is still on the table. It's a stark reminder of the deep conflicts just simmering below the surface of these talks.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. You've got a potential trade truce, you've got a strained alliance, and all these military tensions simmering in the background. So with all that going on, what are the key takeaways from this whole high-stakes trip?
All right, so here's the bottom line. Any hope for a U.S.-China trade truce really hangs on this deal, swapping lower tariffs for fentanyl control. At the same time, the alliance with South Korea is definitely under strain because of these deadlocked talks over defense costs and worker visas. And shadowing all of this, you have North Korea's missile tests and China's really stern warnings on Taiwan.
And all of this really leads to the one big question we're all asking. Are we looking at a genuine diplomatic breakthrough here that could actually reshape global trade? Or is this just a temporary pause, just kicking the can down the road in a much larger ongoing conflict? I guess we're about to find out.